that song, "Don't Try That in a Small Town."
Right.
And it was like, and they had something like, "Oh, stopped it at a red light." It's like, "Oh, a red light. Okay." City slicker.
Right. Welcome, everyone, to the Storycraft Cafe. I am your host, Hank Garner. Today, I am really excited to have Claudia Gray joining me on the show. She's got a brand new book. It's been out about a week, and it's called The Rushworth Family Plot. I love this book so much, Claudia. It is so much fun. And I'm just realizing that I forgot to change my shirt and I'm disappearing into my green screen. So
I like it. I like it.
Sorry about that, everyone. It's a little weird, but you know what? We're just rolling with it. We're just rolling with it. How are you today, Claudia? Thank you for joining us.
I am doing well. I am deep in work on another Austen-y thing, but not a future book in this series, which I am doing a completion of her story fragment, The Watsons, which will be out next year. And that is an adventure and a very exciting thing to be doing. So it's been a very Austen-y day, but with no murders, at least yet.
Well, you know, you take what you can get, right? Any day without murders is, technically a good
day. Unless you're a murder novelist, in which case sometimes it is a bad day. But
right. Well, we were just chatting before we went live, and I had already clicked the button when Claudia was telling me that one last funny story a minute ago. We just realized that we're probably related. I think Claudia is you're from about a couple hours north of where I live, and small world, but via Italy, naturally.
Via Italy now.
Yeah, natural. I mean, where else would you be? When you leave northwest Mississippi? Yeah. So you naturally go to Italy, of course. Why not?
There were a few places in between, but we've been here for about a year now.
What took you to Italy? Was it work or just
no?
Pleasure?
Though I can't say I regret not having a front row seat. Really, the whole world has seats, but no, it was just something. Even before I met my husband, we had each individually kind of had the dream of maybe going to Italy for at least a few years of our life. And then when we did meet and marry, it was like, oh, and we talked about this a lot. I realized I had a path to citizenship, and we kept talking about it. And finally, a few years ago, it sort of became, well, is this a thing we talk about, or is this a thing we're going to go do? And we decided to go and do it. And so far, so good.
I love it. That is a dream of mine. I am a lover of Mediterranean cuisine, and I have a couple of author friends who are thriller writers, and they happen to be sisters, and they're of Greek heritage, and they have adopted me as one of their own. So anyway, that's neither here nor there. The Rushworth Family Plot. This is the fourth book that you've written in this Jane Austen sequel series. First off, how fun is it playing in that sandbox with these characters?
It's tremendous fun. It is also, a little nerve-wracking.
I can imagine.
I've also written work for Star Wars and the X-Files.
Right.
And so I'm used to the idea that there are people out there that already love these characters who may or may not agree with your take on these characters, etc. Jane Austen is harder because, so much of the material is more nuanced and deeper and richer. And also with a fictional world, you can either make something up, or you can talk to the people who made some things up and they'll make up another thing for you. With Jane Austen's world, you're dealing with the past, and you'd think that would mean you could look everything up. But as they say, the past is another country and they do things differently there. And sometimes even historians do not agree on some very basic things. nobody makes much of a record of the everyday, and so a lot of times there are things about like, well, did they wear their dancing slippers to the ball in the winter, or did they have to wear sturdier shoes and change into the slippers at the ball?
Important details.
Important details, and details there is not that you don't have consensus on. So it is tricky, but let me, all that said, it is tremendous fun. I love wondering where these characters have gone and what has happened to them after the events of the original novels. I try to work with the flaws Jane Austen gave them, because I mean, they all learn, they all gain some wisdom, at least the main characters do, through the experiences of the novels. But I feel like Austen was a wise enough judge of human character to know we don't really get over our flaws. We just get a lot better at managing them. And it takes a lot more to push us over the edge, but there's always a place,
Right.
And so it's interesting saying, okay, all right, what does make Darcy sort of shut down emotionally again? And of course, with Mansfield Park, you have actually an incredibly dramatic story.
Yeah.
One of her most dramatic, and I think probably her most scandalous. And I think often it's not recognized as such just because the main characters of Mansfield Park are very upright. Everybody around them is a hot mess. So there is a lot to work with.
Yeah. Well, Mansfield Park is an interesting take, because you have situations and characters that are very scandalous, especially for the time, like you said. And, a couple of centuries north of that, like we look back and we say, well, of course, it happens this way or that way. And it wasn't necessarily, that wasn't necessarily the common thought at the time. So like you said, the past is tricky, because when you look back on the past from our modern sensibilities, we can't help but imprint our own feelings on that, when that may not have been the way people felt at the time. So how do you kind of navigate some of that stuff to put yourself in the place of the characters of the time without alienating your modern readers? That's kind of an awkward question, but
no, I get it. I mean, that is the trick of writing anything set in the past. You're trying to capture a past mindset, a past world. You're still trying to be intelligible to an audience, and you're dealing with both the reality of what was and our perception of what was, because Mansfield Park is very scandalous, as you say. Jane Austen obviously knew about all of that rather famously. There's that joke in Mansfield Park that Mary Crawford makes when she's talking about sailors, and she says she's seen too much of it. She goes, "Of rears and vices, I saw many." That is a joke about exactly what you think that is a joke about. It's supposed to be a very shocking and improper joke, but Jane Austen made it.
It probably was taken a little bit like the line from Gone with the Wind.
Which one?
Frankly, Miss Scarlet, I don't.
Give a damn.
Yes. Yeah, right.
Yes,
probably landed with the same kind of oomph that did when Gone with the Wind was new.
It was both meant to raise eyebrows, but back then, a lot of people read fiction aloud in company. So, she set some people up to read that joke, and presumably they did, and there are other littler things too, like if you read any Jane Austen novel, you will never hear, a young woman refer to a man who is not directly related to her as anything other than Mr. Mr. Darcy, Mr. Bingley. The one exception to that is Frank Churchill and Emma, who always gets called Frank Churchill, because his last name was changed when he was taken away from Mr. Weston. And so the people of Highbury call him Frank Churchill because Frank is the name his father gave him. And they're keeping that connection. If they just call him Mr. Churchill, it separates him from his father. I'm sorry, that's a huge digression, but
no, but anyway, an important digression.
You would think that in the Regency era, no young woman ever said, oh, this guy's name is Tom, or or John. But if you read letters from that era, including letters from the Austen family, they're full of referring to neighbor boys and their brothers' friends by their first names. There was a difference between what was done and what was admitted to be done.
Sure.
And, and things were a little earthier then in some respects than you would know just from Jane Austen books. I always joke there's a limit to how prim any society could be before the invention of indoor plumbing. There was a certain amount of earthiness that was inescapable. And there were things like, Georgian political cartoons or cartoons about society. These were published in newspapers. They were posted on the city streets. Several of them were obscene enough that you would not see them posted in public today. And they would have walked right by these on the street, So it's interesting. I'm trying to stay more into Jane Austen's world because that's what I'm working with.
Yeah.
But where, and these are murder mystery books. So where we need to get into a few different details of life, I feel like there is room to do that. And usually there's a Regency way. There's a period appropriate way to get to that. I'll conclude. I think this was a very wandering answer, but
no, I love those wandering answers. Those are the best.
But it always comes back to, I had one reader once say, you're talking about things, and she was referring specifically to Jonathan Darcy being kind of neurodivergent. She says, you're talking about things they didn't talk about then. And I said, no, I'm writing about things they didn't write about then. The same things happened.
Sure.
People talked about them. They talked about them differently, and they admitted different things to different people. But, the world has both changed incredibly and yet in some core respects not changed much at all.
Yeah. It's so funny. You talk about the earthiness of, certain periods, and my wife and I will watch Regency romance movies or TV shows or whatever. And it's so funny when they're on the summer season, with these balls, and everyone shows up in all this regalia with just layers and layers of clothes on. And, I live in South Mississippi. The humidity is terrible, and parts of England have similar humidity issues, and you can just imagine these people had to smell horrendous in all of these layers of clothes, and it's just so funny to see a romance budding out of this when everyone smells like trash.
Well, two things. I mean, there is one great letter of Jane Austen's to her sister Cassandra, where she said something about the hot weather. I believe the phrase she used was, it keeps one in a state of perpetual inelegance, which I love and plan to use.
That's
sometime.
My new phrase, by the way.
Yes, perpetual inelegance.
Yeah.
But another thing, and this seems like a real aside, but it's kind of not. Years ago, I read a book about perfumes. and the making of perfumes. And one of the perfumes the making of was the one that Sarah Jessica Parker worked on. And most celebrities, when they create a perfume, perfumers bring perfumes to them and they say, I like that. And then that's what they did with it. Sarah Jessica Parker actually got really interested in it and wanted to talk. And they were having a conversation with her. They're like, smells you like. And she was naming things. And she said, and body odor. And they said, body odor. And she said, really, I think all of us like body odor on some level, but we've been conditioned to think we don't. And I think there might be something to that. I mean, this is the way most of humanity smelled most of the time, you know, up until very recently. Did you register that as bad? I don't know.
That's
I don't know.
Yeah, that's something for us to ponder.
Yes, body odor with Claudia Gray. No, everybody's glad to be here.
Right. Yeah, I know. When now we have a short clip to pull out of this to blast all over YouTube. So Claudia, let's talk about playing in established worlds for just a minute, because Jane Austen, this is the fourth book in this series. People are obviously loving what you're doing here because you've published 4 books now. These are beloved characters. This is a beloved world. People from all walks and stripes love to go into the world of Jane Austen and to the world of Regency romance in general. But you've put a new spin on it with murder mysteries. First off, where did the idea to take this beloved world, these beloved characters, and do horrendous things to these people? And how did that first idea come to you?
Well, I definitely am not the first person to do Regency murder or even Jane Austen-y murder, because the idea came from years ago. I think it was about 15 years ago now.
Yeah.
Surely not 20, but a while now. 15 sounds about right. There was an announcement that the great P.D. James was writing Death Comes to Pemberley. You know, I about lost it. I was so excited. Just like, this is going to be great. Somebody's going to kill Mr. Wickham. They all have motives. It's going to be fantastic. Oh, I can't wait. Anyway, this is spoilers for a 15-year-old book that's also already been a TV show.
You've been warned.
Yeah. The person killed is not Mr. Wickham. And I literally could not get over it. I was just like, why would you do that? Why would you do that? You know, but I also learned the lesson, like sometimes when you react really hard to somebody else's creative choice, it's actually your own creative self knocking. And I was like, there is a story about killing Mr. Wickham to be told. And I decided I wanted to dig into that. And over time, it evolved until it became sort of everybody. There are characters connected to all 6 books that she published in the original book of my series, The Murder of Mr. Wickham. So I got to kind of tie everybody together a little bit. Not extensively, not too much. My little in-joke to myself was having Mr. Knightley from Emma and Edmund Bertram from Mansfield Park be cousins, because in my favorite filmed versions of those two, both characters are played by Johnny Lee Miller. So I got to remark on the family resemblance.
Love that.
But I got to get that all together. But I always say that you can only get all the characters together so many times, as we learned from the book Spiritual Cousin, Avengers: Infinity War. You know, you can really hit it once. After that, it starts getting a little unwieldy. So I decided that future books would take place primarily, not solely, but primarily in the world of one of her novels. And so the second novel is The Late Mrs. Willoughby, is mostly Sense and Sensibility. The Perils of Lady Catherine de Bourgh is, of course, Pride and Prejudice. And with the Rushworth family plot, we have reached Mansfield Park.
Love it. Do you have more planned? And
not only do I have more planned, the 5th book is written. It has Oh, that reminds me, I actually have a last copy edit to review on that. Thank you for asking that question. And that'll be coming out in summer next year. And I am contracted through a book 6 that I will start working on later in the year. So there's going to be at least 6. My personal hope is to take it to 8. I feel like 8 would be a very good place to stop, but we'll see what happens.
I love that. So you are now writing in the world of Jane Austen, and each of these murder mysteries, as you said, are an homage to previous works that, if you're paying attention, you get the connection. You also have written Star Wars and X-Files, these huge franchises. You also have written your own world and characters that are not part of franchises. How did you go from how did you get into writing franchise fiction like Star Wars and X-Files and all of that? And let me tag onto that. Is the Jane Austen, is it the same kind of thing as writing for Star Wars? Because those are kind of existing franchises. This is public domain. Do the same rules apply? Are there
oh, not at all. Public domain, no one can stop you.
Okay, that's what I assumed.
I'm sure, but, Jane Austen might wish violently that I could be stopped. But on the other hand, she might be highly amused. Northanger Abbey was not written by somebody who hadn't enjoyed a Gothic or 2 in her day.
Of course.
Well, I got into writing fiction in the first place through fan fiction. That was the first thing that I did. The X-Files was the very first thing I ever tried to write. I had always loved books. I had always loved stories. I had always thought writing fiction would be a wonderful thing to do, but I just had no confidence. I never took creative writing class. I never pursued that in college, anything like that. But X-Files fan fiction, it was like Mulder and Scully, they need to kiss. They're not doing it. Something's got to happen. So, and that actually turned out to be a great place. The first stories were not great, but I just kept practicing and practicing and practicing, but out of the sheer fire of obsession. And then I realized all the other things I was obsessed about, because if you're a big fan nerd, there's usually not just one thing. There's many things over time. And so I wrote a lot of different stories, and I started really having fun with it and exploring different voices, different genres, different lengths. I'd always been like, how could anybody write a novel? How could you come up with that much story? And then I had my first novel length fan fiction idea, and literally the answer turns out to be, oh, you keep making stuff up. Just keep going. Just keep going until you have an actual story together. And there was a lot of power in actually writing 90,000 words that had a beginning, a middle, and an end, and some subplots. And I didn't own the characters, and I didn't own the world, and I'd never make a cent off of it. And it was still going to be years. I think it was 5 years after that before I sold my first book. But I knew I could. I could from that. Yeah. So I was used to working with other worlds and other characters. And if you're writing in a thoughtful way with other worlds and other characters, it actually teaches you a lot about what effective world building is, what good characterization is and is not. It was a big learning experience for me. I wrote a lot of Buffy the Vampire Slayer fan fiction. And then when I was moving into some other things, I was like, oh, in that world, you got out of anything by coming up with a magic thing that did the thing you wanted it to do. And it doesn't actually work that way in most worlds. Not saying that makes it a bad thing. That's just the kind of thing that it is. Yeah. But it's like, oh, you need a little bit more plotting experience and breadth than you're going to get if you're only working in that, it teaches you a lot. But anyway, so I began working on my own things, sold my original novels, and had been writing, let's see, I think it was 8 years after I sold my first novel, 6 years after my first novel was published, that the email came saying like, oh, would you be interested in working on something for Star Wars? And of course the answer was yes. You know, it was a huge
Who wouldn't?
And it is very, very different because, as I said, Jane Austen can stop me from doing nothing.
Right.
Lucasfilm can stop me from doing almost anything. That said, the fun of Star Wars is getting in there and arguing for what you want and making your case. And if you make your case well enough and you're like, no, this really works for this story, and it doesn't inadvertently trip over something else that's being done in a movie or TV show you don't happen to know about yet.
Right.
You know, you get a lot of leeway. Actually, I've been continually surprised that my Star Wars work really feels like my work. You know, they are my books. They are not the things that Lucasfilm told me to write. They're, you know, they come to me and they're like, we'd like a book about young Princess Leia. And that's literally about it, you know, and then I get to create the whole story of how she gets involved in the rebellion, which was great.
Fun. So when you're writing for like Star Wars, since we're on that subject, is there like a keeper of the lore? Like I think in a lot of people's minds that there's this, you know, library of, you know, all of the Star Wars facts, and you have to find where you can wedge a story, you know, in between things. And there's a great counsel that you go, you know, before and, you know, submit your story idea. Like what is that process like? You know, let us on the outside in a little bit.
How fanciful this would be, but the big library is called the Holocron, and the Great Council is called Story Group. And you don't work with all of Story Group. You usually work with a couple of people in Story Group.
Okay.
And yes, you are trying to fit into canon, but a lot of times they're, you know, it's a big galaxy. And with Star Wars, sort of the challenge is coming up with something that feels like it's original, that people haven't seen it before, that, you know, it's not just a remix, but at the same time connects in a meaningful way, I guess. So, you know, it's fun to do. It's fun to do. And with Jane Austen, I need to hew a little closer, you know, with these books. And obviously I'm playing with tone a little bit because Jane Austen did not write murder mysteries. They weren't quite yet a thing. Edgar Allan Poe would not be long behind, but you know, they weren't yet really a genre. So I'm having to play with it a bit, and it's finding the voice that still feels Jane Austen, but can also feel Christie-esque, cozy mystery.
Right. Do you find that, and I'll just say this, that Star Wars fandom can be a little rabid? You know, these are characters that people care about. I first saw the first Star Wars in 1977 when it came out at a drive-in in Meridian. And
I have fancy drive-in City Slicker.
Right. Well, and I had never heard of it until I went to school one day, and all of the kids on the playground were playing. I was in the first grade, I think, and they were playing Luke Skywalker and Han Solo. And I was like, who are you talking about? And then that weekend, my parents took me to see the movie, and I had no clue what I was in for. And my life changed, you know, that day. And so naturally, you have a generation of people like my age who that was our first experience really with science fiction, and really shaped us. And, you know, if you grew up in the 70s and 80s, you didn't have access to things like our kids have now. My kids have Disney Plus with every Star Wars and every Marvel movie. I mean, literally at their fingertips, they can watch them anytime they want. When I saw Star Wars, I didn't see it again for years until it played on television, maybe. Or
I remember it was a big deal when it came on TV, like all week. Like, it's coming. You're going to be able to see it. But I mean, it was in movie theaters for almost a year. Because when you didn't have cable or immediate even network viewings, and you didn't have downloads or streaming or DVDs or anything, movies would stay in theaters, and Star Wars was in theaters for well more than a year. I remember they did a special poster, celebrating a year of it being in theaters because people kept going.
Yeah, and we're lucky now if something stays 3 or 4 weeks before.
Oh yeah, it's a big deal. Things just vanish, and you don't get to have that experience.
Yeah.
And it was fun. It was fun seeing those things with crowds. People lost it. It was great.
Well, it's interesting because then we made up stories. You're just playing with friends where, I'm Luke Skywalker. What if we went and did this? And I didn't come up through fan fiction necessarily. I really admire and appreciate what fan fiction has done for writers, and really, like you said, gave you a way to hone your craft while playing, in someone else's sandbox. I think that is wonderful.
Well, let me interject though. I did not begin writing fan fiction to be like, I will learn how to write. I will hone my craft.
Right.
I did it because it was freaking obsessed.
Because it was exactly.
And I'm an obsessive. Like right now, we're not going to talk about Andor, because then we're not only not going to talk about Jane Austen and the Rushworth family plot anymore, we're not going to talk about anything else in Star Wars.
Understood.
All my friends in Italy are like, what is this Andor? I'm like, well, let's watch it, shall we? Right. And I love it. But you can learn through it. But fan fiction, I really miss, this is the thing I talk about at school sometimes, is especially those first few years of mass use of the internet before social media and the algorithm came in, and the manipulating of opinion and the creation of faction was a profit-making enterprise.
Preach.
Back when it was just goobers online going, I like the X-Files, do you? Yeah. Everybody was so nice to each other. We had so much fun. And I made some friends through that I am still friends with to this day. One friend in Ireland, this was great. We sent each other our fanfic for years. And then finally it was like, I was going to come to Ireland and meet her. And all of my friends are like, what if she's an axe murderer? And meanwhile, all her friends who are in Ireland are like, what if she's an axe murderer? And,
but with a much better accent.
Yeah. I was like, if this person has successfully pretended to be this obsessed with Angel the vampire for 3 years, she deserves the kill. She's earned it.
Right. I didn't take my chances at this point.
Yeah. There are still, because she and I are still friends to this day. And so I've gotten to know some of her friends and family, and there are a few of them who still refer to me as the axe murderer, but fondly now.
I love it.
I hope.
You need a t-shirt.
Yeah, Amy. Yeah, the axe murderer.
Right.
Yeah. I'm sorry, we got really off track there.
Well,
I was like having a conversation with me. I'm so sorry, everyone.
No, it's fine. It's fine. My point, my original point, not that our side tangents were not important. Don't think I'm saying that. But Star Wars fandom can be a little obsessive. Still to this day, people are very opinionated about, it stopped belonging to George Lucas decades ago, because Lucas made decisions and people revolted against him, for decisions he made about his characters, his world, his property,
which is true for a whole lot of fiction. It's just Star Wars is so big.
It is.
You want to talk rabid. Yeah. If you want to talk rabid, go into certain corners of the internet where, if you're looking about Regency cooking and Regency eating, there definitely was something being served that was not quite the modern scone, but a proto scone, sort of called rock cake, etc. The question, were they ever at that time referred to as scones? There are little corners of the internet where like people are ready to throw down on that. Blood could be shed. It is, there are people who care passionately about any fandom. That's what makes it a fandom instead of like a thing people see. Star Wars is just so big that it can get more momentum behind what would be in most other fandoms, a fringe thing. Even a fringe thing in Star Wars can be 100,000 people.
Right. And proto scones are something I didn't know that I needed to be obsessive about, but I'm afraid I'm going to go down a rabbit hole.
I have actually made them. I have a book called Dining with Mr. Darcy that has period recipes, but adapted with modern terminology, because until incredibly recently, and I mean within the last 100 years, recipe books were things like put in enough flour. There weren't any standardized measurements, work in some butter.
Yeah, measure with your
like
heart.
Yeah, exactly. Or even my grandmother's recipe. She's, put in a 5-cent Hershey's bar. I'm like, well, how big was that? I don't, but this recipe book has worked out what the proportions must have been for these things to work. And I have made rock cakes, and they are delicious. They are very, very good. That? If you can find rose water and currants, they can be yours.
I'm going to jot that down. Okay. So we've established that the Star Wars fandom can be a little much. Not that it's unwarranted. People love it. It has become part of people's identity. They connect with these characters. There are things that we love and things that we love to hate, and it is what it is. It's a pop culture phenomenon. When you start dealing with Jane Austen, you go from this little niche of society that loves this space opera, and we then come to a much broader, wider audience that can have opinions about what you do to Miss Austen and to her world. Have you bumped up against any people that are a little obsessive about you playing in her world?
Oh, a handful. But first of all, after writing Star Wars, nothing online will ever scare you again. At least nothing fictional. And for the most part, I see it's coming from a place of love and a place of protectiveness, which I fully understand. Sometimes there are things I disagree with. I don't dig in and argue because, everybody's got a right to feel how they want to feel. And sometimes it's interesting, and sometimes I'm like, well, that's not how I look at that character, but I could see that that's a very, very valid take on that character. I mean, that's one of the things when you're writing about especially something as rich as Jane Austen's worlds. These characters are not one note. They're complex, and they're described, with very subtle brushstrokes and lines of dialogue, and there's a lot of reading in that can happen. So interpretations can and do vary. The only thing that I ever took exception to, and I still didn't really get into it online, but one thing that I feel fairly firmly about, there's a very compromising letter in The Murder of Mr. Wickham. And more than once, I've seen people saying, like, nobody would ever have written that in a letter in that era, ever. Nobody would ever have written that down. And my sort of counter to that is, we know, or at least we feel we know, Jane Austen's life. She lived with her family. She never married. She had, what we would consider a very sheltered, in some respects, existence that was pretty free of anything we would remotely consider scandal today. And I'm pretty sure that's true. Still, her sister Cassandra burned the majority of the letters that Jane had written her, as much as she loved her sister and as great as those letters were, because it was private.
Right.
It was private. It wasn't anybody else's business. And that doesn't necessarily mean that a letter just like the one I'm talking about in The Murder of Mr. Wickham would be written. I don't know that, but my point is just sort of neither does anybody else, because there's a whole realm of Regency era correspondence that nobody from our era has ever seen or will ever see.
Yeah.
A lot of things were written about in letters that do not exist and are not handed down. So I would not say, oh, that's proof positive that letter could be true. I'm just saying there's room for it to be true.
Yeah.
And when you're writing about the past, a lot of times, like I said, historical sources don't agree always. And sometimes you just have to pick something credible and believe in it and work with it.
Yeah. A lot of times there's room for it is the best you're ever going to get. And you just have to go with that. Yeah.
Yeah.
A friend of the show, Bob Salvatore, wrote a Star Wars novel, I think it was Vector Prime, where he killed Chewbacca. And, Bob took a lot of heat from fandom for killing Chewbacca. Since you are writing in Jane Austen's world, but writing cozy mystery, by the nature of murder mystery, bad things are going to happen, at least to someone. And you are bringing, some beloved characters into, these tawdry affairs sometimes. Have you ever done anything to a character that have surprised readers, or that, maybe you've gotten a little pushback on?
Nobody's ever been upset with anybody that I killed, because I'm just going through and killing the worst people in Austen. I think half the people who bought The Murder of Mr. Wickham were like, yes, somebody needs to kill this guy. I think one of the reviews said Claudia Gray is systematically killing off the worst characters in Austen, and I am here for it. And that is exactly the spirit that I'm hoping. That's exactly the energy. There are disagreements on a few things, but for the most part, people are willing to go with it. I mean, you have some people who are purists who won't read any Jane Austen sequels or retellings or whatever at all, and I respect that. I get it. There are things that I would not read corollary publications from, probably. Even as a fan fiction writer. So, I get that. But for the most part, if you're open to a Jane Austen murder mystery, for the most part, people have been great.
That's wonderful.
Almost everybody, really.
Yeah. When you start thinking about a new story, because you've said that your stories in this series correlate to existing Jane Austen books, and you're if you're clued in, you can see where you're pulling from, and lots of little winks and nods to the readers who know. How do you start thinking about, like, okay, this is gonna be my take on Mansfield Park? How do you go from that to then constructing a murder mystery? Like, what are some of the thought processes that like, do you have a checklist? Okay, if I'm doing this, if I'm going to include this character, this needs to happen. Like, what are some of the dots that you need to connect just to get you in the mind frame of plotting out this mystery?
Well, first of all, who's going to die?
That's important.
Generally, this is going to be somebody the readers will not like. Also, who could do it? I didn't know that I actually had something with The Murder of Mr. Wickham until I realized who could actually do it. Who would I believe doing it, and why? You can't just put a chainsaw in Mr. Bingley's hands. I mean, first of all, they didn't exist, but you know, you can put an axe in Mr. Bingley's hands and have everybody be like, "Oh, sure, I buy that." Like, no, you know. Or if the murderer is a character, you would tend to like what would get them there, what would justify this level of behavior. So those are really the two main things, like who's going to die, who could do it. The next part of it is who else could feasibly have wanted to do it, because you need to have many, many suspects. And then, and it's weird because I was into writing this series. I was in the second book before I really got this. Like, I understood it. I had read it, but I didn't. There's a difference between knowing a thing and your creative imagination working with a thing.
Right.
So the thing became, all right. Basically, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought there for a second. But I basically, while I was working on the second book, I reread Murder on the Orient Express.
Okay.
And it was only then that I realized, or fully got, like, everybody in every scene is telling a lie.
Yes.
Everybody's lying. Why? And what are they lying about? And there have to be all the other reasons for them to lie. These reasons do not have to be nefarious.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, some of them aren't nefarious at all. But they
right.
have to be things they feel strongly enough about to keep secret. And once you know who's dying, who did it, who would have wanted to do it, and the other secrets, at this point, now you have a story. Now you're working with it. And it's amazing when you reread the Jane Austen novels, as I do very frequently. It's amazing how many undercurrents are there, sort of waiting to be picked up on or waiting to be considered, which is great.
Love it. Reed posted a comment, and this is going to be comment of the day, I think. Congratulations, Reed. Mixing genres. How about a comedy spy novel in that universe? Jane Austen Powers.
Well done, Reed. I would love to say that I've not considered an Austen-esque Regency spy book before. I have.
As you should.
I don't know that it would be quite comedy. I don't know that the music would have a big place in it.
Right.
But then again, Bridgerton has showed us any song can be
any song
if you want it enough.
That's right.
I have thought about that. I mean, that was an era when, I mean, it wasn't modern intelligence, but there were all sorts of interesting and cool devices. But that is another thing. I mean, you know, at one point early on, I was discussing with my husband, and he was like, well, you know, you could really get into what was going on. And there was a political thing at that time that was very interesting, but finally I had to say, like, it's too much. It's too far afield. Once you've got the murder mystery and the Jane Austen, that's where you are. Throw one more thing in, and you're not in the world anymore. You're not in the mashup anymore. Now you have another thing. And what I've learned, next year will be 20 years since I sold my first book. What I've learned is that when you have that many, if you have more than two things trying to go together, what you have is a new thing trying to be born. Don't try to force it to be that. Like, let that marinate, think on that, let it become its own thing. So could there feasibly be some espionage story told in that era at some point?
Of course they could. Yeah.
But it will not be a part of this series.
Right. Gotcha.
Sorry, with the distraction, everybody. The dog is highly incisive at this time, and she can be very distracting when she wants to be.
Understood.
Anyway,
Understood.
If you see me doing this, it's like the dog's doing something else. Okay.
In writing franchise fiction or writing your public domain fiction, it basically being on a schedule where you have to turn in especially writing franchise fiction, like for Star Wars. I know we keep referencing Star Wars, but it's a big deal. Has that taught you anything? Has that given you tools that you keep in your author toolbox that then when you write, the stories that you completely dream up, have you picked up things from writing the other series that now you bring with you?
Well, I wrote more and more original stuff before I did either franchise or public domain fiction. I will say the thing that helped me the most with that, honestly, was journalism, which I worked in for several years. And with journalism, there is no time to get precious. If they want 750 words at the end of the day, you're going to have 750 words at the end of the day. And if an hour before the end of the day, they come back and they're like, add these 3 pieces of information, and now it's 400 words, you're going to make that happen too. And if the editor cuts a phrase you liked, you are not going to sit and go home and cry. You're just going to keep on going. That is the nature of it. And of course, when you're writing fiction, you do have so much more ownership of it, and length is not nearly so circumscribed, etc. But it does very much help to have the experience of knowing I can get some words down on the page today. I may not keep any of them, but I can do it. Okay, my editor doesn't like these 4 things. I think she's right about 2 of them. 2 of them I think she's wrong about. I'm going to give her one and fight for the last one. You pick your battles, you move forward. And it's a level of professionalism that you have to have if you're going to continue publishing regularly, regardless of what it is that you are publishing. And journalism was a very good way to get a lot of information about that.
Love it. The Rushworth Family Plot is available everywhere now. Go visit your local bookstore, grab a copy of it. If you don't have a great local bookstore, we will put links to it in the show notes to make it easy for you to find. Claudia, if people are just discovering you and want to dig into your awesome, massive back catalog and follow along for new news and events and things like that, where is the best place to get in touch with you or to follow along for all the great stuff you're up to?
I am almost entirely off social media at this time. I did that a few years ago I thought it was going to be temporary. And then all of a sudden I was like, what is this feeling of peace? How do I suddenly have time again to read books and enjoy life? I highly recommend it, guys. I keep up on Instagram mostly because there I can also see dogs. And I believe I'm author Claudia Gray there. My assistant keeps up my threads and my Facebook. Those things exist. So you'll hear about appearances and releases and things on there. And I'm one of the 14 people left on Tumblr. And there you will, of course, find me reblogging absolute ridiculous nonsense because that's what Tumblr is. So there.
And you have a website where
I do have a website which is currently under reconstruction, but from that website you can get links to my Instagram, my threads, things like that. So you can get that information. I also have a newsletter, which is really overdue for an issue. Thank you for reminding me of that. I'm going to get that out in the next week or so. And I hope to be a little bit more regular with that newsletter in the past. I also try to get out and do some appearances, even though I now live in Italy. I did a few things in the US earlier this year, later this year. Right now, the only event I have is in late November, early December in Stuttgart, Germany. So if
easy for you to say,
Stuttgart. I don't know why I just said it like that. I'm so sorry. But next year I will spend about a month or so in the US and do some events, and we will publicize those when the time comes. So
perfect. Well, we'll link up all those places in the show notes to make it easy for folks to find you. Claudia, this has been so much fun chatting. So awesome to know that we're related. And
okay, City Slickers.
Inside joke for anyone watching, but
from Mississippi, they know,
yes,
and are also related to us.
That's right. The Rushworth Family Plot. Go grab your copy today. Claudia, thank you so much for taking time to be on the show and being so generous with your time.
All right, thank you.
Thanks for watching, everybody.